to Faith in Politics. We hope you have had a wonderful week. We'd like to thank all our viewers that are watching on Colo TV and listening on K-Light Radio, but we also do not want to forget those people that are watching on YouTube and Facebook Live. So remember to click subscribe. We want you to like it. We want you to share it with friends. It really helps us to get the word out about this show. On today's episode, Jim Hochberg and I are going to talk to David Fowler in Tennessee to see if maybe the Supreme Court is going to do something positive and maybe just possibly become a voice for life. And there's some other issues that we're going to discuss. So let's chat about that. Welcome to Faith in Politics this week. I have my trusty co-host, Jim Hochberg, back from his trip to New York.
It was fabulous.
Welcome back, Jim. You don't look like you're too worse for the wear.
Did a lot of bass fishing. It was fun.
I'm sure you did. I for my viewers and listeners that don't know, I like to give Jim a lot of hassles every time he leaves Hawaii and goes to New York. But
wait till you're gone for the next 2 weeks.
Yes. And you want to stick around because I think today's show is going to be a really good one for everybody.
Yeah.
But let's briefly talk about the craziness that's going around the nation right now. I mean, the first and foremost on everybody's mind is the $3.5 trillion infrastructure reconciliation bill.
You got more money to throw into your tax bill?
You know, what's really interesting is I did everything in my power to actually look at this bill, and it's not in existence yet. They're still working on it.
It's just a number.
Yeah. So basically, all of our viewers and listeners, they have to just take whatever talking point of whoever they're listening to, whether they're listening to MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, whatever, they're going to get their idea of what's in this
So this
bill.
is so weird because people work and they get paid and they know what their paycheck's going to be and they know what their bills are. And so they say, I got to pay my rent. And I got to pay my insurance, and I have to buy food, and then I have, $100 left over for fun. That's not what Congress does. Congress says, what can we agree to spend? 3.5 trillion. Okay, we'll agree to that. Let's figure out how we want to spend it. Who does that?
Well, I'm telling you, if I was an economics teacher right now, I'd go, I'm going to teach you how to balance your budget based on how Congress does.
Yeah.
Somehow I don't think that would work, but It's very interesting. But that is the top of mind of people because it means more money, right? So it means taxes, it means all kinds of things. So as we actually get an actual bill, you and I will definitely be talking about that. The other thing that people are talking about is what's happening in Cuba and all the protests.
Oh, they just don't like COVID.
Well, what's really interesting is when you listen to the discussion that's going on about this, like, okay, we don't want those immigrants.
Right.
Those immigrants are not allowed.
You know why? Because if you're protesting communism and you get to immigrate to America, Americans might hear you and not want communism in America.
Well, when I was watching the speech, right, of our wonderful, fearless leader from DHS telling them don't come, I laughed and I go, wait.
I thought you like open borders.
Well, no, I was going to say, okay, so don't go to Florida, but get on the boat and go all the way to California. They'll let you in and they'll give you a free trip across somewhere across the nation to some state.
It's insanity.
To me, it's like if you're going to support what's happening, then at least be consistent in what you believe. And
you're
it's
asking,
very, very hard.
You're asking politicians to do something they haven't done in such a long time. It's called be honest, have integrity.
Well, what's a big thing that you always remind everybody, right? You guys have to stay on top of your government.
You do.
And I don't care whether you're an R or a D or an I. The point is be consistent in your messaging. So you cannot tell one group not to come because you might not like how they'll vote. I mean,
Well, you can,
this is
but
crazy.
You should say that's what you're doing.
Yes. Now, speaking of voting, the other issue that everybody's talking about is these legislators in Texas that fled to Washington so that they wouldn't have to do their due duty. And they're going to be arrested when they get back.
If you remember, they did that by driving to Arkansas 5 years ago or something from Texas. They drove away.
Could they not have just done could they not have just stayed in Texas and done some floor speeches about why they disagreed with what the Republicans were doing?
It depends on what the Texas Constitution provides. Texas is a different animal than most of the states.
Well, because all they're doing is they're kicking the can down the road. They're going to ultimately have to do their job. So it's like this, it's like don't run for office if you can't do your job.
What's the second most important thing politicians have to do? Probably daily. Fundraise.
Well, I know that tagging along with that story is a lot of people are a little upset that they were on that plane without any masks on.
No, I don't
That
care.
really bothered people. I mean,
I had to
again,
wear a mask, and you're going to have to wear a mask for your whole flight.
yeah.
And it's not fun.
But I think it goes back to
And
the
they
point of being
actually
consistent.
police you on the plane. The flight attendants 2 times over a 10-hour flight had to remind me that my mask was hanging down, which I knew, but it's really uncomfortable to wear a mask nonstop for 10 hours.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is crazy. So the other thing that is going on right now is there has been a House Oversight Committee that's been established to investigate the Arizona audit. And I love that because of all the craziness that happened because of what came out in Maricopa County.
Well, this week, Charlie Kirk's radio show on 690 in the morning was actually playing the verbatim live testimony by the experts that did the accounting, the audit in Arizona to the Senate in Arizona. And I think you can listen to it. Like, again, I like to go to the original source. You don't have to read reports. You can listen on his blog, Charlie Kirk's stuff. It's long. I mean, it's hours long, but you can hear what the expert guy says happened, and it's interesting. Some of the shenanigans that were being pulled by the Maricopa County elections people fighting against this audit being done. I mean, you got to hear it.
No, and it's not talked about quite as much, but it is out there too. Is the same thing that's happening in Georgia.
Correct.
So it's like
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. It's, these were the areas where all the confusion happened during the election. And, it's still brought up. If you're a Democrat, you're going to bring up how Trump tried to steal the election and he just did all this crazy stuff. And if you're a Republican, you're going to say that you have questions, whether you agree that Trump won the election as a Republican, whether you believe that or not, because there are some Republicans that don't. The point is everybody does question, though, if the election was truly fair and accurate.
The reason that I have a question is I saw the video in Fulton County, Georgia, of the lady in the yellow shirt doing stuff after they closed down the voting
Pulling
thing.
the suitcase out from under the table.
Yeah. I mean, come on. What is that?
Well, Jim, this is the world
That's
we
a
live at
question
today.
I got.
That is okay. Okay. The other thing that's really interesting is they're talking about this, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. And I know you have some strong feelings about this. It's the decline in the number of vaccinations. So what's happening is there are less people getting vaccinated now. So now there's a stagnation happening, right?
Correct.
But the cases are going up again because of the Delta variant and this major push in the media now with us and them. It's us and them. The vaxxers against the anti-vaxxers.
May not be it. It may be that one or more of the vaccines aren't very effective.
Well, people were saying a long time ago that what was going to happen is this was going to be the pandemic that never ends.
Correct. Yeah, it's like the LGBTQ, LMNOP, QRST,
what's the next variant? And if it's not COVID, what's the next health crisis that could happen where they could do a shutdown?
But here's the interesting thing. Have you ever gone to your doctor? So, okay, my doctor checks my blood every 6 months, and he regularly says, Jim, your cholesterol is kind of high. I really would like you to take a statin drug. And I regularly say, okay, but no thank you, because I don't want to take a statin drug. Wouldn't it be weird if my doctor said, well, I tell you what, Queens Hospital is going to give away 5 $1 million prizes to people that take the statin drugs and go into the lottery for the prizes. Would you take your statin drug if you got a lottery entrance? Or if they said, well, Jim, if you don't take the statin drug, you can't go to the library anymore. I mean, what medical thing has ever been like that?
But how about the flu now, right? Because a lot of people won't get vaccinated for the flu. So maybe they should offer incentives for that too. I mean, we've set up a precedent now that is kind of questionable.
And now the thing is, maybe you can't go to work, or maybe you can't go to the university if you don't, or maybe you can't play sports, or maybe you lose your scholarship. The point that I'm trying to raise is, what the heck medical treatment ever was marketed that way.
Well, and I'll tell you, Jim, that is the number one email and phone calls I'm getting into my office right now, is that we are moving toward, even though it's not mandated, we seem to be moving in that direction because of some of the decisions that are being made by some businesses, some companies that are saying, look, you just don't have to come. Colleges, right? We want you to be vaccinated. Well, I'm not going to get vaccinated. Well, you know what? Then you can choose not to come to my college. Now, one of the things I want you to address, Jim, is that a lot of people don't know that there's federal employment law and I checked, it was last updated on June 18th, 2021, that says private employers can generally require employees to get vaccinated for COVID-19 as long as they comply with federal employment laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion and disability.
So I'm going to ask you a question you probably can't answer. Was that new regulation run through the Administrative Proceedings Act that requires public advance notice, 90 days to comment, and then a period of time of incorporating the comments into the final
I
rule?
would wager no, but I will go back and look, and I will go public if I'm wrong. But
Well, they probably didn't.
Yeah, I would say
if they
no.
didn't, the question becomes, is it an unlawful rule? And it is.
So the last thing that I want to briefly talk about is one of the things that's on everybody's lips right now is the Hyde Amendment, because we know that the bill that was actually put out by the president does not include that anymore, which means that the public will have to pay for abortions in ways that they did not have to do before.
So what's really cool about that is Javier Becerra says, because the government spends money on COVID things, the government has an interest in knowing who does and does not have the vaccine. If the Hyde Amendment goes away and the federal government is spending money on abortions, would the Republicans in Congress have the right to know who's getting abortions?
Well, let's continue that conversation with the abortions. In our next section, we're going to talk with David Fowler from Tennessee about one way that we may be making a stride on the issue of abortion. We'll be right back.
We're here in Waimanalo. Lucy, tell them why we're here.
So we are here celebrating all the volunteers that have come out over the last, 6 months?
Yep.
Aloha, my name is Blanche McMillan. This is my family. Today we have a special event that Palo Station has made to thank all the people. This is the most wonderful event that I've ever seen, especially for the homeless.
There's bouncers and horseback riding, there's petting zoos, there's so much activity, live music, good food.
We had this wonderful dream about coming to Waimanalo and just blessing the community. Well, today I hold some of that blessing in my hand with the soup from the garden.
I want to thank each and every one of you folks that has been helping me here. I am so blessed to have you here today.
Thank you so much for all the volunteers that served alongside us to help us to get to this point. This is only beginning.
Nobody delivers good news to Hawaii like Kalo TV delivers the good news. Because we're the only local Christian TV station that's right here, on island, understanding our culture firsthand. A handful of creatives with one singular mission, to take the message of Christ even further and stronger with high-definition clarity. We are striving to reach across the Hawaiian Islands with clear, creative, and constant content that expresses the heart of Christ. Encouraging and uplifting programs broadcast through new infrastructure with next-generation technology, service, and coverage. Because the more you access Kalo TV, the more your faith will grow and be uplifted. And the more your faith is uplifted, well, this is why we do what we do. Whether it's over the air, cable, or online, the message is unmistakable. What is our mission? You, the body of Christ, encouraged, growing, empowered. What about your mission? Are you ready to partner with Kalo TV as we reach Hawaii with the good news?
Come and join us.
Can't wait to meet you. Help us spread the good news. The only thing missing is you.
Come on out!
Help us bring salt and light to the islands with the message of aloha. Kalo TV. broadcasting aloha 24/7.
Aloha and welcome to Faith in Politics. And we have a really exciting guest for you today because one of the things that you're going to hear constantly in the news right now is what's happening with the Hyde Amendment. Now, we're not going to necessarily talk about the Hyde Amendment, but what we are going to talk about is where there might be a voice coming out of the Supreme Court to protect human life. And we're going to kind of refer to the Dobbs case that we had talked about several weeks ago. But we're actually going to go over to Tennessee to my counterpart there, David Fowler, and he's with the Family Action Council of Tennessee. See, the C can be anything. It can be committee, it can be coalition, but we do welcome you on the show today, David, because you did something really exciting in the amicus brief that you prepared in the argument that you're using. But before we jump in, I think I like to, first of all, again, welcome Jim Hochberg back to the show, who was vacationing for 2 weeks. But what I'd like you to do is, for a moment, pretend that our viewers and listeners do not understand legal terms. And they know that there's a court case, but they may not know what an amicus is and what the purpose is. And then you can kind of jump into your foundation for your amicus.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to let Jim do that, but I'll be happy to do that.
Well, Jim, once Jim starts talking, we may never.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's good. In that case, I will turn it over to Jim. Go, Jim, go. Yes. Just to provide some context, in May, I think it was May 15th, May 17th, middle of May, the United States Supreme Court, after more than a year, decided it would grant a petition for certiorari, which is essentially a request for the court to hear an appeal from a U.S. Circuit Court to decide the constitutionality of a law in Mississippi that bans all elective abortions from and after 15 weeks. And this is really groundbreaking that the court has taken this, because the constitutional question the court wants to have addressed really provides the first opportunity since 1992 for the Supreme Court to substantially modify or perhaps even reverse its abortion precedents, known commonly as either Roe versus Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Casey. The decision in 1992 was Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So,
well, and let me just jump in there, because the fact that the court agreed to hear the case is actually incredibly important, because they take so few of those requests every year, like 3% or something.
That's right. And one of the other things, just to provide some background, that a lot of people do not understand, and it's true of politicians in particular, which is the worst place to not understand when you're making laws, is that the Supreme Court tells you what question they want you to address. You don't get to go to the court and say, would you answer this question? So, for example, 2 years ago, I think it was 2019, an important decision came down from the U.S. Supreme Court called June Medical versus G. Y'all may remember that case. And it was involving a Louisiana law regulating clinics and doctors and privileges and so on and so forth. And people talked about it as, oh, this could be the case where they reverse Roe versus Wade. And that was wrong. That was not going to happen. Not that it couldn't. The court can always do whatever it wants to do. It's the Supreme Court. But the question that was in front of the court was whether or not the Louisiana law was consistent with the decision from the Supreme Court on the same topic from 2016. They weren't asked to address Roe versus Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Casey. The nature of the question did not lend itself to the case being reversed. But here, the question is, are all elective abortions under 15 weeks unconstitutional? Because you see, what happened in Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992 was the Supreme Court said that the state does not have an interest in protecting the life of the unborn until the child is viable, meaning it can survive outside the womb with medical assistance. Well, at 15 weeks, you can't do that. So in other words, this particular question in this particular case, for the first time since 1992, actually puts Roe and Casey in the crosshairs of the very question itself. And that's why we got busy trying to put together what's called an amicus brief. So let's move to that point for just a moment. An amicus brief is the way to describe it is a friend of the court brief. So in major cases, usually the plaintiff and the defendant, here the state of Mississippi and the abortion clinic, Jackson Women's Health Center, they've all agreed to let other people file friend of the court briefs. And
that means that those filers don't actually represent parties in the case. They represent outsiders.
That's right. They're not parties in the case. We don't get a chance to argue to the court, but we can address the issue that's in front of the court. And typically, we represent certain interests, friends of the court. Again, as Jim said, not parties, but friends. So, for example, the Hawaii.
See, it's not easy, is it? Hawaii Family Forum. Yeah. So, full disclosure, we are part of this brief.
Y'all are a part of this brief, along with 20 other family policy organizations, including ours in Tennessee. And then we also helped put together a brief on behalf of state legislators. Obviously, state legislators have an interest in whether they can protect the life of all human beings and persons in their state. And I believe we're going to have right at 400, maybe a little over 400 legislators from 41 states.
Including Hawaii, right? We got
yes,
including Hawaii Representative Bob McDermott signed off on this.
That's right. And so so there are two friend of the courts. One is or what we would call state policy organizations that care about state policy involving what it means to be human. Because what it means to be human, what it means to be a person, doesn't just affect abortion. It affects marriage. It affects transgender issues. It affects really everything, because the law is for persons. When you read the 14th Amendment, what does it say? No person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So if you don't know what a person is, you don't know who gets that protection. So all of the state policy organizations like ours are affected dramatically by what constitutes a person under the Constitution. And of course, state legislators are affected because they're supposed to make the law for the benefit of persons. And if they don't know who persons are or the limits of their power, then they can't do their job. So that's what we mean in this case by amici or amicus briefs. We're friends of the court, giving them our perspective based upon our interest in this issue.
You know, one of the things I appreciated about this brief, and it's one of the reasons we agreed to sign on it, was your outside of the box thinking in arguments. You know, we know where people are coming from when they agree or disagree with this, but it was really interesting where you came from in your argument. And I would really love for you to share that. And I know Jim has some thoughts about that as well.
Well, and actually, if we look at Dobbs first, they were asking the court to say that viability shouldn't be the test because the mother's interest, the child's interest, the medical community's interests all lead the court, hopefully, to say viability is just arbitrary. There are these other reasons to drop it down to the 15 weeks. But that's not what you guys did. You gave a different reason for the court to accept the Dobbs argument.
And it's an interesting argument. And I want to see how far this goes.
Yeah. In essence, if you wanted to sum it up, it was, this is none of your business. And you can insert other profane or proper adjectives in front of none. It's none of your business. Is really sort of our argument that these issues were left up to the people and the states. So one of the things that, and it's a long story, and if we had time to recount it, I would love to, because to me it's an example of how God in his good providence works things together for good. This argument that we're making in abortion actually came up out of the context of me trying to figure out how to deal with the issue of marriage when the Supreme Court in 2016 said that states must license a marriage between two people of the same sex. And I began to think, well, why is the state required to do this? Why do we have to get a permission slip to get married? Weren't people marrying before there was a state of Tennessee or a state of Hawaii? And I began to think there are rights, there are relationships, there are truths that exist outside the law that man makes, which is, of course, what the Declaration of Independence says. And the government, it actually has a duty to do certain things. It has a duty specifically to ensure that the rights we already had when we created the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution came after the Declaration of Independence and after the War for Independence was over. So we had rights coming into the creating of the Constitution. And the object of government is to protect the rights that people already had, that they had as a matter of nature, of custom and tradition. And one of those rights was to life, one was to liberty, and one was to property. The common law of England that we adopted in our nation, which is essentially the expression of traditions and beliefs that go back to, we can't even remember when we didn't believe this. Well, it was that everybody had a right to life because that came from God. It didn't come from the government. And so therefore you couldn't take it away unless you passed a law saying, now this is a wrong, don't go do this. Don't go over here and knock Jim upside the head and kill him. Because if you do that wrong, then we will take your life or we'll take your liberty. We may take your property. That was due process of law. I knew what the wrongs were I shouldn't commit and the consequences of them. And yet it still had to be determined by a fair process. So the concept of due process of law that the court used to create a liberty right for a doctor to kill another person actually is being construed to deny the life of persons, which is the very predicate under the requirement of due process. In other words, if you didn't have a right to life, liberty, and property, you wouldn't have a need for due process, right? The due process is to protect what's underneath it, life, liberty, and property. And so all that stuff began to come together. And in this particular context, it was like, well, people had a right to marry before the government. Why can't they still get married without a permission slip from the government? What would happen if we began to look at that? And so it was out of that context, I thought, well, people had a right to life before the government existed. How can they abolish that? How can they get rid of it? How can they give somebody so much liberty that they abolish my right to life? So that's where it all started. And there's a Ninth Amendment that, Jim, if you studied that in law school, you went to a unique law school. But I went through my constitutional law book. It's 1,600 pages that I went through in law school. And there's only one reference to the Ninth Amendment.
Well, the Ninth Amendment's a ugly stepchild amendment.
Well, let's do this, gentlemen, because the discussion of the Ninth Amendment is going to be a good one. And so we want to take a brief break. And when we come back, we'll let you two talk about that a little bit more, because I do think that our viewers need to understand that. And David, I know you've got some strong feelings about that. For you viewers out there, we are a viewer-supported program. And so if you want to support Faith in Politics, please reach out to ColoTV.com and find out how you can partner to continue this program and keep us on the air. We'll be right back.
Aloha, this is William Harrison, president of the Christian Legal Society of Hawaii. We're having this amazing event. It's a free webinar. It's going to feature two distinguished professors of law, Jonathan Turley, as well as Michael McConnell. They will be speaking about religious freedom and the First Amendment rights. We're going to be discussing some amazing cases that are before the U.S. Supreme Court that will affect your religious rights in our state. Please join us for this free event. Register online. We hope to see you there.
We're here in Waimanalo. Lucy, tell them why we're here.
So we are here celebrating all the volunteers that have come out over the last, 6 months?
Yep.
Aloha, my name is Blanche McMillan. This is my family. Today we have a special event that College Station has made to thank all the people. This is the most wonderful event that I've ever seen, especially for the homeless.
There's bouncers and horseback riding, there's petting zoos, there's so much activity, live music, good food.
We had this wonderful dream about coming to Waimanalo and just blessing the community. Well, today I hold some of that blessing in my hand with the soup from the garden.
I want to thank each and every one of you folks that has been helping me here. I am so blessed to have you here today.
Thank you so much for all the volunteers that served alongside us to help us to get to this point. This is only beginning.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. You're watching on Calo TV and you're listening on K-Light Radio. And we are continuing our discussion, Jim Hochberg and I, with David Fowler from Tennessee, who is my counterpart there in Tennessee. And I'm sure that our viewers and listeners have figured out already that he is an attorney. He did get his JD from the Cincinnati College of Law. And you had a Chapin Thomas scholarship.
I did. I had a scholarship to go to law school and could have gone to University of Tennessee and paid, or gone to University of Cincinnati for free. And my dad's counsel was go for free. So I did.
And you were a state senator for 12 years.
That's correct.
And you're a choir director. What is the range of your singing voice?
The range is bad to medium.
Are you a tenor?
I'm actually sort of a baritone.
Okay.
With a more bass, but I call myself now, I was a choir director and I sang in college. And all. I call myself a pew singer now.
Okay. Well, that's good. You don't have to wear a tux.
That's correct.
Well,
that's
correct. Music.
So, but I still sing in the choir.
Well, it's so
no solo work anymore.
It's so funny because as we jump back into the discussion, it is interesting because Jim is also a musician. And he plays guitar. And what's really interesting, and it does kind of tie in a strange Portuguese way, I'm tying all this together, is that, that's right. Everybody always says that whenever I bring that up, I have the crew like waiting. Oh no, she's going to say it again. But Jim actually played music with our resident atheist who attacked us for our position on same-sex marriage. And I thought that was kind of interesting because music can bring even people on the opposite sides together.
Well, the truth is we didn't jam together, but we talked about it.
We talked about jamming together.
Yeah. Our atheist is a graduate of the Berklee School of Music. And so when he found out I played guitar in the worship team I didn't tell him, but he found out we became friends.
Well, he wasn't an attorney, but he used to like to try and school us on what the Constitution was about. So going back to the Ninth Amendment, which is where we kind of left off. So go back to your thoughts on this, because it is an outside of the box way to argue this case.
Yeah, the Ninth Amendment was actually described by the late Robert Bork when his confirmation hearings came up to the Supreme Court years ago as an ink blot. What does it mean? And actually, Amy Comey Barrett, in her Senate testimony, a year ago, I guess it was asked about the Ninth Amendment. And she said, I won't comment on that because we've never had a case involving the Ninth Amendment. Now, before we tell you what the Ninth Amendment is, let me explain why that's important. When the Supreme Court in the Casey decision in 1992 said, we're going to stick with Roe, they said, we cannot change a holding as significant with such national impact as Roe without some equally strong constitutional reason for doing so, argued on the basis that we normally argue cases on. So in other words, what they were sort of saying is, don't come up here with the same old arguments and see if we've changed our mind, because then that'll just look like it's politics on the court. Give us something to hang on to in the Constitution, argue that point the way we normally argue cases, and then I'll consider it.
You know what? When I read that, I thought what they were saying is, even though in Roe we made it up, we're not going to change it by making up something new. That's the way I read that.
Yeah, that's sort of what it is. We're not going to make up something different. And in fact, what was interesting to me is that in Casey, the court said, of course, medical science will continue to advance, and we expect it to. But that's not the critical determining constitutional issue. Well, see, most of the heartbeat bills have been argued based upon changes in technology and science, which Casey said, I'm not interested in that. In 1992, we knew when conception occurred. I mean, that's been known for 100 years. It's just that you weren't a person because you had life. You had personhood because you could actually get outside the womb and still live. So the medical science can change all kinds of things. So we argue, for instance, about fetal pain. But if you're not a person, why do we care about the pain? That'd be like saying, well, we used to think rocks couldn't feel pain, but they can feel pain. Well, it's still a rock, I guess. Maybe we wouldn't worry about it. I mean, that's a bad analogy. But I was looking for something to say, what has the court never considered? What have they overlooked? Give them something different from the same old, same old. And Jim, at the top of the show, I think we talked about the fact that there have been other cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, but there have been lots of cases that don't go to the Supreme Court on abortion. They just don't hear them. For instance, Alabama had a dismemberment ban abortion coming out of the Fifth Circuit in 2019, and the Supreme Court unanimously said, we don't want to hear that case. Why? It's the same old, same old. Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion and saying, I would like to reverse Roe, but you keep giving me the same stuff and you don't squarely present the issue to me so that I can reverse it. Well, Mississippi's given us a chance. So I started looking for what is out there. And because I realized that there's law before man's law, God's law is there. You can pretend it's not, you can ignore it, you can try to suppress it, but ultimately you'll kill yourself on it. It leads to death. And so I thought about the Ninth Amendment because it says this, and let me repeat it for your listeners. It says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights. Now let's just stop there. What is that? First Amendment is an enumeration of a right. Right to freedom of religion, right to free exercise of religion, right to freedom of speech. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Those are enumerated rights. So let's go back. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, now we know what those are, shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, you don't have to have a lawyer and say, oh, I didn't go to law school. I don't know what that means. If you just can read English, if you got through high school, you ought to be able to say, okay, there's certain rights that are enumerated, but there are other rights. Oh, well, where are those other rights? They obviously didn't go away. Well, they were retained by the people. Well, okay, but where are those rights? Well, it would make sense to say those other rights are in the same place the enumerated rights came from. In other words, picture this big circle, this universe of rights, and they come from history and tradition and natural law and revelation and common law, and they're all out here. And the founding fathers said, okay, we're going to create this Constitution and we're going to enumerate some, but it doesn't eliminate everything else that's out there in that sphere of universe of rights. And don't you take those that we've enumerated and construe them in such a way as to deny or disparage the ones that we have. Can't do that. So think what's happened. The Supreme Court took the 14th Amendment due process clause, an enumerated right. It says you shall not deny anybody life without due process of law. We've already talked about the fact the right to life is the right that underlies, undergirds, provides the foundation, the predicate for the requirement that you can't take my life until I've done something wrong according to law and you've proved it according to a fair process. Things like the right not to incriminate myself in the 4th or 5th Amendment, the right to a jury trial, an impartial jury my peers, all those kinds of things. A right to confront my accused. Those are other enumerated rights. So the 9th Amendment is saying you cannot interpret this right to procedural due process to destroy the life of any person. Well, what did the Supreme Court do? They said this procedural right to due process of law creates a liberty so broad that the right to life of other persons can be violated. So we're going to go into the court and say, you never considered the 9th Amendment. It's never been up. Amy Comey Barrett, you admitted it's never come up. But the very first original case about judicial review, Marbury versus Madison in 1803, the court there said it cannot be presumed that any provision of the Constitution is without meaning. So the 9th Amendment means something. It's not like your larynx, or well, not your larynx. your thyroid or something. You don't have to have it. You don't have to have your tonsils. No. The Ninth Amendment must mean something. What does it mean? Well, you don't have to be a legal scholar. Just read the words. The implication is we knew we had rights. They didn't come from the Constitution. We're going to spell some out. But because I spell some out, don't use that to say that's all the rights you have. You only have the ones in the First Eighth Amendment. No. I have other rights. And don't you dare interpret that I don't have other rights. And don't you interpret the ones that I enumerated to deny me those rights.
You know what?
So we're making a constitutional argument that says your interpretation of the 14th Amendment isn't just wrong. It is, in fact, unconstitutional and prohibited.
And what you're saying basically to the court is the legislature of Mississippi, acting on the political power of the people of Mississippi through the Ninth Amendment rights, want to protect up to the 15th week.
Right.
And you're basically saying to Justice Thomas, this is what you asked us for, take it and go.
That's right. Now in Tennessee, we want to protect it from the heartbeat, but we're free to do that. Once you concede that a person includes a kind of being, that which has life from outside of itself, not created by law. Now, let me help your listeners understand what that means. Corporations don't have life from God or from outside themselves. They're created because we pass a statute that says if 3 people go do this, sign this form, file it at the Secretary of State, issue stock certificates, that thing becomes a person, a legal entity, okay? But the common law that was on which the Constitution was framed said, no. There are artificial persons like corporations, but there are natural persons. And the natural person includes all those whose life comes from God. And so if anybody's ever drafted a will or read their will, it refers to your issue or your descendants. Why? Because those people who may yet be in your wife's womb could be your children, and they would have a right to your property.
You know what?
So the Supreme Court would acknowledge in this sentence, picture the sentence, life, liberty, and property, persons. Persons have interest in life, liberty, and property. The Supreme Court would say, oh, well, a person would be the unborn when it comes to property, but the meaning of the subject of the sentence, person, changes when it comes to life. Well, that's an incoherent, grammatically incomprehensible sentence. Imagine if every time I said, Jim is on the radio show with me, and Jim and I are both lawyers, and Jim and I talked about the Ninth Amendment, you'd say, oh, that's Jim. No. In the first Jim who was on the radio show, that's this Jim. But Jim and Jim who talked about went to law school, well, that's a different Jim. And the Jim that talked about the Ninth, that's a different. You'd say, oh, I can't understand what you're talking about then. If every time in the sentence, so now let's picture the sentence this way. I talked to Jim on the radio show who went to law school, and we talked about the Ninth Amendment. That Jim would have to be the same thing for all 3 purposes, wouldn't it? Or otherwise the sentence is unintelligible.
Well, that's, one of the things that I really appreciate about this conversation is that even Christians that don't have a legal background can understand that what we fight for as Christians is the very right to life. It's what we believe. It's inane to who we are as Christians. It's what we will fall on the sword for. It's what we believe deeply. So we might not even have to understand that this is in our founding documents, but it is in our founding father coming from God documents,
right.
What's written on our heart. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. We want to thank David for his time, and we'll have you come back, David, because I know that there's a lot more that you want to share about this.
I'd love to sing sometime, actually.
We will
get Jim to bring his guitar, and we'll do a little medley.
We will definitely
raise some money for Hawaii Family Forum.
Do that. But in the meantime, viewers and listeners, we do want to hear from you. So if you have an idea of a topic that you'd like us to talk about on this show, make sure you send me an email at eva@kalotv.com. We'll be right back. Mahalo. Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're sure welcome.
Hi, my name is Susan Duffy, and I'm the president of the Pearson Foundation of Hawaii, located in downtown Honolulu. We exist to provide pregnancy resources for those women who find themselves with a difficult or an unplanned pregnancy. For more information about us, please visit us at our website. We really look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
We have a mission here at Kalo TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my God.
So it's where the state cannot tell the church how to run their services, what songs to sing.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears. Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. In these dark and disruptive times, there's never been a greater need to be rooted in God's Word. The Kalo plant has been a sustaining food in Hawaii for centuries, and Kalo TV aims to bring much needed spiritual nutrition to these islands. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. Hey, Eva, today we're going to talk about the world according to Jim. Is it politics or medicine? And what should we do about it?
Politics or medicine? Okay.
So, COVID continues now for more than a year to be a political, medical, social, family, personal event.
And if we believe all the media reports, it'll last until next year.
And as, you know, when the thing first started out, it was kind of, what is this and how do we deal with it and how do we tell what it is and what's it going to do? And so at the beginning, I have some grace that, okay, we didn't know. But as we're getting further and further away from the beginning, and we're starting to, in my view, to see maybe it's a little bit more political than medical. And I'm going to explain why I think that. And then we're going to talk about what is it that we here in Honolulu, in Hawaii, what is it that we're called to do now to make sure that we have a better experience in the future. So if we remember at the beginning, don't wear masks, wear a mask, make your own mask. Cloth masks aren't any good. Wear a mask and a clear shield, wear 2 masks. So I'm thinking, okay, is that medical or is that political? Well, I don't know. Then we had hydroxychloroquine cocktails will save your life. Hydroxy cocktail is useless. Now we know hydroxychloroquine cocktails saves your life. Ivermectin helps reduce severe illness for early recovery from COVID. It's useless. Oh, it saves lives. COVID doesn't sicken school-aged people, children. Oh, close the schools. Oh, open the schools. Oh, vaccinations needed to go to college. This isn't scientific medicine, is what I'm thinking. So on August 3rd, last year, the National Institute of Health, National Library of Medicine, on their website, had a COVID study advice. And this is what they said if you were going to participate in COVID studies. Quote, choosing to participate in a study is an important personal decision. Talk with your doctor and your family members or friends about deciding to join a study. Spring of 2021, we're going to make vaccinations mandatory. This isn't medicine. This isn't scientific. It just really, at this point, to me, reeks of politics.
And it's really important that you remind the viewers that the form that people that choose to take the vaccination sign, and it has all of the information on it, it says on there that this is just
if they give it to you before you get the shot.
Well, even if they give it to you after.
Well, it's too late after.
It's too late after, but the point is that the paperwork says, right, that this
is not approved.
It's not approved.
It's emergency
and that
use.
this is a test.
But we have talked about that in the past.
Right.
So this week I was looking at, because I was on vacation for 2 weeks. I'm going to miss you for the next 2 weeks. But this week I was looking at things since May of 2021, specifically dealing with these PCR testing issues. And the PCR test is the nose thing and you put it in the thing and you give it to them. And then what do they do with that? So they take that sample and they amplify it by spinning it, called cycles. And the number of cycles is called the cycle threshold. Last year in July, a year ago, Dr. Fauci told a group of medical people, if you cycle more than 30 times, you're starting to get unreliable positive results. Because what happens during the cycling, and the reason the number of cycles isn't constant, is they cycle it until the machinery can replicate the genes of COVID-19. And so if they get a positive COVID gene before 30 amplification cycles, you're positive. If they don't get one by 30, they go 32, 35, 40, it can come up with what it registers as a positive COVID. But what Fauci said is after 30, it's not really that helpful because it could be a false positive. So what the PCR testing does, it only says, was the cycling amplification able to recreate the COVID gene? It doesn't say how strong it is, doesn't say how infectious you are, doesn't say how deadly it is in you. It just says the machinery was able to get a yes or a no, and either you were negative. When I came back from New York, I was no. I had no problem coming back to Honolulu. The lower the number of cycle amplifications, the more potent the COVID gene is because it's below 30. The higher the amplification, the lower the viral load, or even not really a viral load because it's a false positive. Okay, so PCR testing is one of the main tests since the summer of 2020 for the purpose of identifying whether the sample shows positive or not positive, negative presence of COVID-19. The government's used that to decide who has to be quarantined, how many cases there are. And when they say we have 50,000 new COVID cases, that's based on the PCR positive. It's not based on under 30 cycles or above 30 cycles. It's not based on the fact that one person can get tested 4 times, which I was when I went to New York at Christmas, because of the circumstances. And if I had COVID and I had 4 positives, it would be 4 cases, not 1 case. So this PCR test has been used politically to jack up the number of cases for, I think, the purpose of quarantining, locking down, not letting people congregate, wearing masks, social distancing, all that. So the question that comes to my mind then is, what about with the vaccine? Right? Because they have a new thing. After you've been vaccinated, if you get a positive COVID test, you are called a breakthrough positive. You've broken through the vaccination. So if they continue doing the PCR test above 30 and causing those to be positive numbers and cases and all that stuff, the vaccine might look less effective than if they went to a lower number of cycles, which is exactly what happened on May 1st. And this is the thing. On May 1st, in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, that the report came out May 28th, 2021. This is what they reported as of May 1st. I'm going to quote from it. The CDC transitioned from monitoring all reported COVID vaccine breakthrough infections, breakthrough is after the vaccination, they've changed from that to investigating only those among patients who are hospitalized or die, focusing on the cases of highest clinical and public health significance. They're not using the PCR test now for breakthrough after vaccination COVID cases. Now, you have to actually be hospitalized, not asymptomatic, not a little bit sick, not flu, knocked out for a week sick, but hospitalization. If they had used that from the beginning, would we have called it a pandemic at all? I don't know, because we didn't do it.
Well, and when you're talking about this stuff, and again, you're getting this information directly from the CDC.
Correct.
So
I don't like to read articles.
Right. You're not
to
talking about someone's interpretation of somebody's report. You're reading it direct. But I can tell you what's interesting to me is I've always thought that there probably were more COVID cases than they were reporting. And let me tell you why I thought that.
It depends on what the definition is. And that's my beef.
Well, yeah. Well, in my normal mind, right? Because I'll bet you there have been people that got COVID that never went to the doctor about it because to them it was like a cold or whatever. So they never went to get checked. So to me, there might have been a lot more COVID cases out there because it wasn't as serious.
But my point isn't how many cases there were. My point is manipulating data to take our liberties.
Well, right. I mean,
and in the state of Hawaii, as you know, I filed 2 lawsuits in June and July of last year, 2020, on COVID violations of personal liberty, and the courts didn't want to deal with it. The legislature didn't want to deal with it. And even after the governor's 60 days of emergency powers expired, the legislature didn't want to deal with it. So, okay, what's our conclusion then? What's our conclusion? Here's our conclusion. Article 1, Section 1 of the state constitution, the first article, the first sentence says, all political power
belongs to the people.
Resides in the people. So people, please don't think of yourself as here and the government as there. The people that wield government power have an equal amount of political power individually as each one of us. It's not separate. And so what can we do? Hey, 2022 is a very special election year because everybody in the state of Hawaii is running for re-election because of the reapportionment out of the 2010 or 2020 census. That means every incumbent has to answer these questions from every challenger candidate. Why did you do nothing during COVID to rein in the governor? Why did you do nothing to figure out that the current breakthrough counting of COVID by hospitalization and death should have been used during 2020 so you didn't have to violate our liberties? And if we take the incumbents and we make them respond to that, they will have nothing to say.
You know, we on other issues too, we've talked about government reporting and not having the facts. And it really is something that we as the people need to start asking.
And there's a constitutional amendment that should be added right after all political power resides in the people. That could be A. B would be any emergency power exercised by the governor or a mayor cannot exceed 60 days unless the legislature specifically passes a law authorizing it.
I can't believe that we just ran out of time again, as always that
Good show.
We do. But what I want to do is I really want to address a viewer question that came in from Edward Panui. And basically, he was asking about the name of the show, Faith in Politics.
Should it be Faith in God in Politics?
Right. And so his question was, does the station have an issue with God in the name? And actually, there's a play on it. Faith in Politics means we bring our faith into politics.
But even more than that, both Kahlo and K-Light are Christian owned.
Yes. So it was not an issue. It was not an issue about God being in there. But your comment about the separation of church and state is something that
correct.
We are going to...
Thomas Jefferson would agree.
Yes. And Jim and I will talk more about the separation of church and state in future shows because we are running out of time. But we want to thank all our viewers who are watching on Kahlo TV and listening on K-Light Radio. And as always, we want you to plug in next week. I will be gone for the next 2 weeks, but Jim Hochberg's got the 2 next weeks covered. So you want to make sure that you stay plugged in. And as always, mahalo for taking time to sit with us. Thank you, Jim.
Aloha.
Aloha, everybody.